Now, let's begin our webinar. I will turn the presentation over to Sam.
Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks Annette and to everyone involved. As Annette said, I'm Sam Ransbotham at Boston College and the MIT guest editor for Data and Analytics. Before we start, I'd like to take a minute to really thank everybody. It definitely takes a small village to put something like this together. I didn't realize how much was how much was involved, and I appreciate everyone's efforts. And we appreciate Teradata's support and resources to organize this webinar. There have been quite a few people from MIT Sloan Management Review involved, and I probably shouldn't start listing names because I'm sure that I will screw up and leave someone out, so I'll just bypass that. But we're fortunate today to have a stellar panel, and I'm appreciative of the time that they put into developing the ideas that we hope will provoke some thought and some discussion. So joining me today are Lin Wu and Sri Narasimhan. Sri is a full professor at the Scheller College of Business at the Georgia Institute of Technology. He's the co-chair of the Georgia Tech's new Business and Analytics Center. Georgia Tech is in an enviable position of being able to combine deep resources in engineering, computing, and in business. So we're appreciative of him bringing his perspective. As a side note, Sri was my very first IT professor back long ago. So I'm on good behavior today. And then we also have Lin Wu. Lin is a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and she's got a rich research program on how IT affects productivity and the economy. I think two aspects of Lin's research are particularly pertinent to today's discussion. And the first is about building off of what we know about managing the vast amounts of data, and two, linking fine-grained digital sort of trace data to the high-level economic trends. Lin has done some really interesting things in that area. And I definitely want to thank all the participants. Just a minute ago, I think they told us we had about 1,400 and something people registered, but that number may not be right. And I see literally, 300 or 400 people signed up. So that's a phenomenal showing for this webinar. Thanks to you all. I'm sure it's actually me that's drawing in the crowd. I'd like to think that, but probably it's the topic, because it is a fun topic. Our format doesn't allow a lot of direct interaction with participants as much as we would like, but as Annette said, feel free to submit your questions, and I'll try to incorporate as many of those as I can towards the end. In terms of agenda, what I'd like to do today is I'll start off and give a little bit of an overview and some context to start provoking some thinking. Then Sri will explain some of Georgia Tech's initiatives and discuss aspects of organizational readiness. And then Lin will build off of some of her data research into the age of the Internet of Things. And I'll kind of finalize by synthesizing, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So let's just get into it. We've had an explosion of interest in the Internet of Things, and probably people here are not surprised to hear that. One of the things I like to do, I think is kind of fun, is to go to Google Trends and check out the terms and how popular the terms are. And so I went out and looked at the Internet of Things, and that's that blue line that you see. And then you always need a reference term for Google Trends. So I picked tree frogs because I think tree frogs are fun, and I'm not really aware of any vast changes in tree frog technology over the last decade. So it seems like a good baseline. And so if you look at this graph, it really points out, I think, three things. One is just how recent this is. I mean, if you look at, the interest level doesn't really start coming up until really not too long ago. And some of that is terminology, the actual Internet of Things technology, terminology. But there also has been a coming together of computing power and low cost and an understanding of value that I think has really driven a lot of this recent interest. And the other part I'd like to point out is how steep this is. I mean, that's just a precipitous, or what's the opposite of precipitous? Unprecipitous. I don't know what the word for precipitous is when it's going up. But it's a steep climb. And the third point is, this is really, Google Trends is measuring search popularity. And so what this also says to me is there are a lot of people out there searching for Internet things and hungry for information. So we thought this would be a great sort of context to start with. And kind of an overview point that I want to make is how pervasive this potential is of this technology. And I have 3 different examples here, and I'll start off in the in the top corner here, and with what I'll call the reality. So I've got a reality, a clarity, and a ubiquity topic here. So in terms of reality, I mean, we hear people joke about, oh yeah, your toaster is going to have an internet in it. So I actually went out there and looked for a toaster and internet, and as far as I know, there's not actually one, but a couple of people have made some fun mock-ups of internet toasters. But we're not far from it. If you think about something like Nest, which is, I guess, getting somewhat trite at this point as the quintessential example, but it does point out that that this is real and there's a lot of potential in that. It also points out, and a couple of things that I think will come up today as we talk, is how fragmented this is. There's lots of different people involved, from Google with Nest and internet providers and power providers. A lot of people get involved here, and it isn't clear how all that interaction will come together. The second point I want to make is about clarity. I mean, we have something like GE with their all the data they're getting from their jet engines for every flight, and it's pretty clear what you could do with that at a first glance. But then if you think about what kind of data can come from cars and car connectivity, there's lots of potential that I think that we have for secondary effects. So what can happen once we have that data? And something like the car involves lots of different people, lots of different organizations. Maybe the engine example is relatively confined to the engine maker or maybe the airline company. But when you get to cars, there's lots of potential for other people to be involved, other drivers, other companies, lots of different car providers, and I think that there's a lot of potential for secondary effects, and I think some of those will come up as we continue to talk today. And then my final one is about how ubiquitous it is, and I've got the labels of everywhere and versus everywhere. I thought that'd be pretty clever, and I'm sure if I went out and looked on the internet, I'd find out that other people have made that joke already. But it's everywhere. So we think about light bulbs and trying to put technology in the devices that are common to our homes, but there's also lots of potential for people to have data collected about themselves. And so if you think about the Internet of Things, one of the questions is, are people things? And to what degree does the Internet of Things apply to the data collected from those? And that really brings up a lot of the secondary issues associated with data collection. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with some of those examples, but so what I think, we could stop there and talk about how rah-rah great it is, but I think that would be a little disingenuous or shallow. And so what I'd like to, hope we can get into today is talking about how we use what we've known from existing context into this unknown world of the Internet of Things and what the new challenges are for that. We're fortunate from the known perspective to have the general analytics explosion as kind of a frontier outpost to learn from, but I think there's much more coming for that. And there's 2 topics that we've broken it down today to talk about, and Sri will talk more about the first one about organizational readiness, and the second one about building advantage comes more to Lynn. But the important thing here is that I'm excited about the potential, but I think we're also wary about the potential effects on individuals, organizations, and society. I mean, we have things that can be used for both good and bad. We've got body cameras that can either protect us or destroy our privacy, and there's nothing inherently good or bad about the technology. It comes down to how we use it. We've got pervasive monitoring systems, which is great if you've lost your kid or lost your phone, but it's terrible when we think about the wiretapping culture that promotes. And so I think our challenge as a society and as organizations is to maximize the good while we minimize the bad. It's a big topic, and we'll talk about some of those implications today, particularly how they affect the management of data. And we hope that this will spark some thinking about how organizations can better manage. The manage kind of word implies coping, though, and I think that's really insufficient for the participants today. If you think about our group of participants, this isn't really a general group. There's a lot of sampling bias in our group. Our guess is that this group wants to go beyond coping and talk more about how to build off current capabilities to gain competitive advantage in the Internet of Things. So with that kind of introduction and ground setting, we'll move next to Shri, who can talk about some of the initiatives that Georgia Tech is involved in and what organizations are doing to get ready for those internal and external changes. Shri?
Thank you, Sam. So, welcome everybody. This is an exciting time to be studying and discussing Internet of Things. As Sam said, this has been become very, very interesting. A whole bunch of people since the last 2 or 3 years, and this coincides with what we're doing at Georgia Tech. And I'll mention 2 efforts that we're doing at Georgia Tech. The first one is this new center we've been having for about a couple of years called CDATE, which is headed by my colleague at GTRI. His name is Alan Luce. So CDATE focuses on all things related to IoT in terms of the entire value chain, from the sensors and beacons to software to solutions to security and so on. And as Sam mentioned, we're lucky at Georgia Tech. We have expertise in computing and engineering and business. So CDATE works across the Georgia Tech campus on IoT, for example, in advanced manufacturing and supply chain and transportation and those kinds of issues. And across these sectors, they're also looking at, obviously, software systems, security, privacy, and so on. So if a company wants to really build IoT solutions, CDATE is a good resource. And where I fit in with CDATE is in the business value of Internet of Things. The other activity that I'm engaged in is in the Business Analytics Center at Georgia Tech, which Sam mentioned. So this is a center that we've been running for about a year and a half, and I've been leading it with my colleague Jeffrey Hu and my most recent colleague Beverly Wright. So the Business Analytics Center is a platform that we use to collect faculty, students, and organizations on analytics topics, including now recently for the past 6 months on Internet of Things topics. So essentially, broadly, we connect PhD students, MBAs, undergraduates who are interested in analytics topics. And one way we do that is to work on cutting-edge projects, some of the things that Sam mentioned. And we do that in conjunction with our executive council members. And these folks help also shape our curriculum and advise our students. We do exec ed programs in these spaces. We're developing new ones there. And we also have faculty across the business school and other areas of campus who are looking at analytics issues, and now increasingly on some of the issues that Sam mentioned, privacy and security, and also obviously looking at the analytics issue. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the governance issue, which Sam mentioned. So there are 2 aspects to readiness, organizations being ready for the Internet of Things. And the way we've gained some expertise in this space is working with these companies in our executive council, and also with other companies who have undertaken IoT deployments, mostly as pilot projects. And we try to understand their internal and external readiness issues. As far as the internal readiness issues, I'd like to spend a little bit of time on these 3 topics. One is the infrastructure challenges, a big area is governance challenges, and the third is talent. As far as the infrastructure is concerned, that's an area where I think we're seeing interesting issues that companies are facing. You have devices which are coming from multiple vendors, and in a lot of cases there are multiplicity of standards. So do you have expertise in-house in your organization to manage these devices? A related question with Internet of Things is the flood of data that's going to be coming from these devices. So it's way more than we've seen in the standard analytics over the last few years. So that's a challenge for companies to make sense out of that data. Do they have the right tools and analytic tools and so on to make sense of this stuff? The other issue that we've seen in the infrastructure, and this is related to what I guess what you get from vendors if you're deploying IoT solutions, is the issue of data standards. And it's not clear that we've reached consensus on data standards. There are some industry efforts, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And a related one, finally, in infrastructure is Most companies have deployed ERP systems or systems to manage processes, and are these systems ready to deal with the flood of data from Internet of Things? So infrastructure is an area that I've noticed executives, especially in the IT world, who are facing these new sorts of issues. Governance is an area where it's really, as one CIO told me, IoT governance is still very much the Wild West. There are lots of IoT projects that I've seen companies engage in, which is very exciting. However, a big problem that companies are facing is these pilot projects are sometimes occurring under the radar. They occur in different departments like marketing or operations or supply chain or finance and so on, or even in HR. So how do you make sense of all these pilot projects? One issue that folks tell me is that where is the chief information officer or technology officer? What role does he or she play in these pilot projects? And as you can imagine, CIOs are typically the data wranglers in companies, and they're responsible for building systems for the long haul. And I think IoT probably needs that kind of a model in place for the long-term benefits. Governance is another critical aspect of governance, which is ownership of IoT data and analytics. It's not clear in some companies after the pilot project who has ownership of these projects and who has ownership of the data. And the other issue on governance has to do with figuring out the value in IoT projects. So a pilot may work well technically, but it's not clear to me in a lot of cases that companies have thought through the hard portion of actually doing the return on investment analysis. Finally, I think I mentioned this in the ERP systems bullet in the last on infrastructure. A related issue, I think, is to get the maximum value out of Internet of Things. Companies will probably need to change the do business processes. I was involved in a study on Internet of Things in machines in a company which has these things deployed all over the world. And even these, obviously, these machines report back to headquarters, but that means that the service of these machines by service techs and so on is a completely has to get the most out of the IoT data and analytics. This company has to completely redo the way it does training and assigns service technicians for on-site repair and maintenance. So that's governance. The last thing internally for companies that I see is an issue that we've seen in talent. We've seen that in the analytics space, and my hunch is this Internet of Things gold rush is going to exacerbate that problem. And is their capability to exploit all the data from the sensors and beacons. Sam mentioned this in the case of, let's say, an aircraft jet engine. You know what you want, but an automobile application, we really don't know how to exploit all the data from all these sensors and so on. I see that occurring in companies when they start dealing with deploying IoT. In terms of talent, on a larger scale in companies, how are they going to become really good at IoT? Are they going to create new centers of excellence, or will it be merged with analytic centers of excellence that we see being deployed and developed in companies? So one way to address the talent issue, of course, this is a bit self-serving, is to work with partners like Boston College or Wharton or Georgia Tech and so on, as you folks want to develop talent or hire new talent. So that's something. So those are some internal readiness issues, but there are also, I think, in the IoT space, I think there's some really interesting disruptions that we see in the external linkages between a company and its partners. One is, I mentioned this issue earlier, I think one is this issue of standards. And one of the fears some CIOs have mentioned to me is, they're afraid of betting on the wrong standard. They deploy a whole bunch of technology, and that happens to be the wrong standard. What do they do down the line, right? So will there be a standards or platform wars? And this occurs in other areas of technology, and it's not clear that it will not happen here also. Of course, as I mentioned, there are some efforts in industry. There's this industrial internet consortium. Some big industry players are trying to develop some standards. That's interesting. And I think Sam mentioned this security and privacy concerns. And if you're thinking of having an IoT application across your supply chain, you have to be concerned about security and privacy, not just within your organization, but across everybody in the value chain. Another aspect of working across industry partners is this boundary, that is, who owns the data across the value chain, who can monetize the insights. So we did a project in Internet of Things in agriculture, in that particular industry, which is obviously not as high tech as some other industries that we've seen. But you have so many players involved. You have the farmers, you have equipment providers, you have seed companies, you have agronomists, you have software providers, you have cloud vendors. And in that particular study, it wasn't clear at the get-go who will own the data and who's paying for the systems and where do the benefits come from. So these boundaries need to be clarified before I think value is realized there. There's obviously policy issues in terms of security and privacy, and I think especially if you go across international boundaries, this becomes even more important, especially if you're operating in Western Europe. I think these sensors and so on, which track your automobile or which track you or which track things happening to your devices, I think it becomes an interesting issue, and companies who are deploying IoT across the planet need to be even more particular about that. And for example, the recent issue in the last week or so about cars from a particular manufacturer being hacked raised question about security. And the Internet of Things space, I know my colleagues in CDATE are looking at this, is security can't be a path. You can't add it after the fact. You shouldn't be adding it after the fact. It should be something that's part of the critical public infrastructure, for example, or in other infrastructures. So it has to be designed from the get-go. The last thing is business models, and I think this is an area where I think already touched upon it. How do you monetize the IoT data? A lot of CIOs and CTOs have told me that how do I monetize it? I know I can get the data, but I think the money is there in analytics. So that's something that some big companies are dealing with in their business model and so on. But again, it's not clear that they're going to monetize it in-house. They've got to sell it to somebody, right? So one of the things that we're thinking is in this particular industry, will new middlemen or new middlewomen emerge to act as neutral third parties to deal with IoT data across an industry, and who can also handle privacy and security issues. So the analogy is to credit reporting agencies in the U.S. who can get data about consumers and companies from financial transactions and banks who curate the data and have become an indispensable part of the functioning of this economy. So I'm wondering if there's going to be something in the IoT space, some new types of business models emerge. Finally, in terms of business models, and I've had conversations with a lot of folks, is IoT, as Sam mentioned, is becoming very popular, but it's not clear where are the locations, let's say just in the U.S., where expertise in IoT is going to emerge. We know lots of universities like Georgia Tech and so on are doing space, but in terms of industry growth, is it going to be a single location or is it going to spread across geography? So some of my colleagues are interested in those kinds of issues also. Look forward to the Q&A later on. Sam, I think you want to hand it off to Lynn?
Yeah, so Lynn, go ahead. Yeah, I'm not hearing Lynn so far. Lynn, can you? Yeah, I think everybody's having trouble hearing Lynn.
Yeah, same here.
Hello? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. Somehow I got cut off the conversation. So I'll repeat what I said last 2 minutes. So in my part, I'm going to talk about how firms can take advantage of this onslaught of huge amount of data enabled through the Internet of Things. By talking about data, we're going to leverage a little bit about what we learned up through the social media and mobile media from the last 10 years, and as a bridge to talk about how the Internet of Things could change for firm value, firm practices, and firm performance. I'm just showing a graph of how much data has been produced by various of your favorite applications. For example, every single minute, Yelp has about 26,000 reviews. 277,000 tweets has been sent, and we have 2.5 million of Facebook shares and about 4 million searches. These are all just happening every single minute of the day. And that's produced a massive amount of data about consumers, market, and products, and beyond. And the Internet of Things are just going to add so much more data, and it's going to grow at exponential rates. For example, the latest data I found is that we have about 2 billion Internet of Things devices as of 2015, and it's projected to grow to 26 billion in just 5 years. Okay, so we're going to talk about an order of magnitude more data than we ever seen before, and how should firm leverage their capabilities to take advantage of data is of an important focus. And in fact, data is not just changing, marketing or consumer media. It's actually changing some fundamental structures of firms. For example, in this Wall Street Journal article in April this year, and data has been shown to be effective new middle manager, in a sense that in the old days, in this quote, basically they're saying is that before they had to go through a marketing manager in order to ask, well, should I make a promotion or advertising event in this site in the first place? But now, instead of asking a middle manager, with ability of data and also with various tools that can visualize and analyze these data, a rank and file workers now can actually make those decisions on their own. Okay, and in this example, instead of asking a manager, this person would simply go for data and use the data to back up her decisions. Okay. So as you can see, although explosion data is only happening in a very short amount of time, but the firm practicing firm structure has actually starting to change already, and that has a lot of implications for employees, for firms, and society at large. Okay. So in a sense that in the past we think about mobile social media and all data associated with this new type of Web 2.0 and computing data, it's really been primarily devoted to marketing channels. Like when we talk about the Web 2.0 activities and the firm investment, largely they're talking about marketing budget. They're largely talking about how much money we're going to devote to marketing so we can get more eyeballs, we can get more people clicking on our products, and whether that can translate into some kind of product sales. And now that data has become much more useful, and especially with the Internet of Things, as these devices can give us even better and even more fine-grained real-time operational data, and we can make decisions on this data in real time. And that involves not just marketing; it involves the entire firm to work together to take advantage of this data. So in a sense, the data we have now are growing to be real-time, a new type of data, and that promotes real-time implementations. So how do we take advantage of data? I think Sri and Sam has both mentioned that data talent, data ability, the ability of firms to take advantage of this data is becoming even more important over time. So I've been studying data skills for a while, primarily using resume data such as LinkedIn, and we've seen that data skills can significantly affect the return on social mobile media. And we analyze this mostly on all public traded firms in the United States. And what's striking is that when we just look at social media engagement, such as Facebook or Twitter, we see that the return value is actually quite modest. Okay, but once you factor in data skill, like basically when a firm has substantial amount of data skills, and simultaneously they started to leverage social media and mobile media, we've seen that effect has doubled. On average, we've seen a 2% increase in firm value when a firm has both strong data skills and strong social media presence. Okay. And I want to mention that this data skill is actually quite distinct from our old version of IT skills. So IT skills actually does not seem to have an effect, because we look at some firms who have this strong intensive IT skills, and we see that those skills do not seem to help this new type of technology that facilitates gathering of big data. And that's really quite interesting, as we can see this new type of technology that has enabled social media, has enabled the Internet of Things, require a different type of talent than we had before. Okay, but what I mean by data skills I mean people who have analytic skills in analyzing, like for example, they know R, they know Hadoop, they know data mining, etc. Right? By IT skill, I'm talking about more of a traditional information technology skills, such as database, such as programming or mainframe computing. So these skills apparently are not as important in this new age in this new digital age. Okay. And furthermore, we look at, if data skill is really important for firms to leverage new data, such as internet, including the Internet of Things. So does it matter where data come from? Like as in the past, as I mentioned earlier, that primarily this data is being used for marketing effort. So does data concentrated in marketing department matter, or does it matter if data skill is actually everywhere in the firm? And interestingly, we've seen that when you have data skill concentrated in a marketing department, and that's the case for many firms, we actually do not observe any discernible benefits for using social media and big data. Okay, that's very interesting, because in a sense, you can think of the marketing is really just the tip of iceberg, and that's really just a small benefit, the first order effect. And we found that when data skills are present in non-marketing department, and specifically when it's dispersed throughout the organization, as in they're in finance, they're in marketing, they're in operations, they're in strategy, and they're in the human resources, all across the firm, and that's when you really see the most benefit has come from. And that's even more important with Internet of Things, okay? Because we get this data. This data is about human behaviors that we can capture in real time at an increasing grain of granularity and ever fine grain of resolution than ever before, okay? So this type of data is not just useful for marketing. It is useful for every aspect of the firm, to make operation decisions, to make strategic decisions, to make, finance decisions, and all of them all in real time potentially. Okay, so unlike IT skills often concentrated in a single IT department, we've seen that the data skill is that should be spread out across all aspects of firm operations to be most beneficial. Okay, and I think this dispersion is only, for now, we only look at social media efforts, but I think this is going to be even more important for the Internet of Things, as this data are really about firm operation in every aspect. So then we also examine whether big data can help existing processes or not. So we surveyed about 300 firms about various existing firm process-oriented practices, such as do you view process as a really important thing? Do you rate your ability in making incremental change and improvements? as well as to use stress and operational excellence over innovation potentially. And we start looking at these process-oriented firms and their specific processes, and we're trying to figure, well, does big data, especially with Internet of Things, can potentially help firm capture value of this data. And interestingly, we do observe that this data has helped process-oriented firms to become better. Like basically, when a firm has strong data talent and they're very process-driven, we've seen that on average they derive a 3% increase in their firm value or their yearly revenues. But interestingly, we have not seen that big data can help with innovation. Okay, so that's really interesting. Is I think in this first order, it's sort of obvious that this data can, these operation data from Internet of Things, from capturing of what consumers are doing, can directly help firms to finesse their existing operations. Like they can figure, oh, this part is not doing so well, and they can identify it immediately through the use of big data, through use of various technologies, and they can make quick decisions and to correct it. But innovation actually is a little different in a sense. A lot of the innovation data are not necessarily, it takes a leap of imagination to transform the data you collected into innovation practice. So in a sense, I think firm can obviously still take advantage of big data innovation, but require perhaps something extra. It cannot be immediately implemented to help with innovation. And that may be something firm that can do with change of existing practices, with change of firm characteristic in some way to actually leverage that. And I think a lot of research should be, will probably go into this. How do big data potentially help firms create innovative products? And IoT, Internet of Things, could be a big help in that regard. And lastly, I want to mention that just as a previous wave of IT adoption has changed organization structure, and we've seen that this onslaught of big data has also started to change organization structure in some way. And the Wall Street Journal gave you anecdotal evidence of hollowing out of middle management. And I just want to show you that this recent study by Christina McHerron in 2005, at least in manufacturing, they've shown that using data or specifically data-driven decision-making practices has led to a centralization of firm hierarchies. Okay, but in our study, we surveyed 300 firms across a wide range of industries. We actually show that decentralization and big data are complements. So I think this is the firm structure, firm hierarchy is still in flux because of big data. Some firms are becoming more centralized, some firms become decentralized, and it's kind of hard to tell at this point which one's going where. And it may be going both. Maybe it's really the middle management are going out, but it's something that a firm should become aware of as they started using this big data, and they can, and not just for immediate operation or performance implication, but they can actually have a large implication on how the firm culture, how the firm hierarchy, how the organization structure as a whole could potentially change as a result of this data. Okay. I think I'm going to pass back to
to me, to Sam.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you, Sri and Lynn. I think those are some nice overviews from a couple of different directions, and I wanted to synthesize them a little bit and think about some underlying themes of what both Lynn and Sri mentioned were around the complexities that these are going to introduce for organizations. You saw some contrasting thoughts about centralization. Sri mentioned that in his example that a lot more things got centralized. Lynn pointed out some both evidence for centralization and for decentralization. And I think that speaks to some of the uncertainty and complexity around this context. So if you think about what's happening in terms of the firm over time with complexity around the Internet of Things, I think we can all agree that we see an increasing demands on infrastructure, governance, and talent. Sri spoke to each one of those issues, and so. But we also see that the organizations are improving their capabilities, and Lynn spoke to many of these issues about how they're using skills from other areas to into the Internet of Things, how they're changing processes and structures to respond, and so we see an increase of the organizational capabilities to handle this complexity over time. And so one of the kind of the underlying questions about this is what happens, with this sort of, as I've stylized it here, the gap between these two lines, when the demands on infrastructure and on people are leave a gap between what the organization is able to do, and so how does that handle over time? If you're paying attention, you've noticed that I've drawn these lines that the slope of this one is a bit steeper than the slope of the organizational increase in response over time. And I think that's my feeling is that's accurate, and we got some research in a recent study that we've done that's on the Sloan Management Review site that indicates that this complexity is increasing more quickly than the organization's abilities to handle the complexity. And that's going to leave this residual gap between these two. And so the question, I think, was, in the future, what's going to happen? If you look at, I've drawn two possible paths for this. So when we talk about increased complexity in the future, is it going to go up? So as things can interact, is the combination of infrastructure, governance, and talent going to compound and make the complexity even more? Or are we going to sort of get a hold of those things and establish standards and procedures and common infrastructure like we have in many other areas? TCP/IP lets us communicate with everyone. There was a world of competing standards for a long time there, but that standard has emerged, and we don't have to think about that anymore. So is that slope going to start to flatten out as we sort of get on top of it? And there's a similar sort of question that happens here. What's going to happen within the organization? In the organization, as things interact, will the complexities grow? So you can think of Internet of Things as a general purpose technology. It's a technology that can be applied to many different areas. And as a general purpose technology, organizations may be able to build off what they've learned in social media and other analytics and better manage the complexity. And so that implies that the organization's ability to handle complexity will go up. Or correspondingly, the organization's ability might go down as they get overwhelmed with all these changes. And so I think that's an open question for organizations everywhere, is to see which direction these go forward. And this makes a big difference, because if you see this bottom line and this top line, there's actually a narrowing of the gap between what organizations can handle, but quite the opposite if the future ends up being these outer lines. So with that, I think we do have some time for questions and answers, and we have actually some fun questions already. I've been fortunate to be able to read some of these as they've been coming in, and so what I'm going to try to do is moderate some of those questions coming in, and we still have a few minutes for those. So please go ahead, and participants, if you have some questions you haven't answered, I've picked out a few already, but then we'll start with those. I think we have a first really kind of pragmatic question. Some of the research that Lynn was publishing. Lynn, where can people actually read more details about that? We have several people interested in learning more of the details behind those studies. Are they published? Are they working papers?
Yeah, I can make them available. I can send you, there are some of it in my website, and I can send you, you can go to my website and find them, or I can send it to the audience.
Okay.
To an appropriate channel.
Okay. Yeah. So Lynn,
they're working papers, but because this is really new, this data science aspect is very new. So they're not as polished as I would like, but just bear that in mind when people read it.
Okay. So one thing is that I've just gotten a little note here that we can actually include some of those links to some of the content that we've talked about in the follow-up email. Thank you. So, kind of going forward, Sri, one of the things I'm pretty fascinated about is the role of technologies and standards. And we have a few questions here about technologies and standards. And there's so many different pieces in this. I think as a general purpose technology, much of the value from the Internet of Things will come from combinations and complementarities between items. So what should organizations be doing now as these standards are evolving? How do they manage to, I think you called it, keep from getting left behind, or should they wait and see? Give somebody something practical to work with in terms of how they handle these standards.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, as I mentioned, one particular consortium, Industrial Internet Consortium, and it's possible there are other consortia that are developing. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. So if you are in an industry in a particular vertical, check to see that. If not, get other folks in a company and start a consortium, because I think what you don't want to get for any firm to be wasting time on is in a standards war, as you mentioned, Sam. I think a lot of the value of the Internet of Things is going to in the ability, as I think even Lynn was mentioning, is to redo processes, get that data, do analytics, and so on. It's not so much are we using standard X or standard Y. So one thing is to sort of tackle that particular issue of standards upfront. And my hunch is, especially in manufacturing and so on, I think there's a lot of interest. And there's some other IT vendors who are also interested in the standards issues. There are some folks in the telecom space who are participating in some of these standards. So that's something to keep an eye on for folks who are interested in the Internet of Things. The other question to think about is to talk with your vendors. So if you're buying these sensors and beacons and so on from vendors, is to ask them about where does this fit in terms of standards, how do I keep updating it, what can I do to be on top of emerging standards, where is the consortium, what do I do? So before you start thinking big dollars into some particular technology, make sure that particular technology is upgradable in terms of standards, all those kinds of things that I think you do with any other technology, you should not ignore in the Internet of Things. Sam, if I could go back to your last slide, is that possible?
Actually, I think you're in control now.
Okay, you mentioned in the top right in terms of complexity, in terms of do I keep going, increasing complexity, or do I plateau out? I think the big difference there, I think, between those two paths is the quality of internal sorts of leadership in the company, right? That is how quickly can folks across the company sort of converge on the use of Internet of Things. And I think Lynn was also alluding to that in some of her research she's done, that data being deployed across the company is more useful than it being isolated in marketing. So same thing out here in the IoT space. I think if the company figures out that we can address these issues of governance and talents and probably deploy infrastructure, IT infrastructure in a smarter fashion, I think then complexity can be reduced. And I think there's no reason why it can't be, but it won't happen on its own. It'll happen with active technology leadership in the company.
Yeah, so much, lots of analogies from prior things. I mean, many of the things we've learned over the years still apply in this context. Actually, that's a lot of what Lynn was talking about. You're talking about much of the learning from prior analytics and social media, offering a lot of lessons for organizations. But Lynn, I was wondering, actually, do you have any thoughts about what's going to be different? So what have we learned that isn't going to apply, or what is there something new about IoT data that's going to be different? I mean, maybe it's going to be larger, but it also seems like it's maybe more structured than social media data. So what are some challenges you think organizations might face, or what are these differences going to be?
Well, I think the Internet of Things data, number one, is just the order of magnitude bigger. Like we're talking about devices, going order of magnitude more than before, and that data could be just tremendous. Another thing is like how to combine this Internet of Things data with existing social media or other mobile media and existing, sales process data with the firm. How do you create complementarities between this data to helping inform things even better? And I think this combination of various sources is really going to be a challenge. And together they give you a bigger picture or a more holistic picture about your firm's operation, about your consumers, about your products, more so than as any single piece added together.
I like that because it speaks to some of the growing complexities too. Though that you're talking about combining things, that's just going to be hard.
Yeah, actually, yeah, exactly. Making decision on Internet of Things alone, I think is is really the small thing. But really making that, combining with the rest of your data in the firm and making really deeper decision, I think that's the harder part.
All right. So, Sri, actually, as you know, security is near and dear to my heart, and you happened to go ahead and toss me a softball by mentioning the car stuff this week.
Right.
So, what are organizations going to do to improve security in this context? If, in my mind, the IoT context seems so much harder than current computing infrastructure, and right now we see that organizations are struggling with existing. What happens when when you talk about IoT, people have given away physical control of devices? That seems so much more difficult of a problem. How are people going to? If people are struggling now, how are they not going to struggle more when it gets pervasive?
You're right. I think you're right. I think, and Lynn hit upon it. Going from, let's say, there are 6 billion or 7 billion people on the planet to 20 billion or 30 billion or whatever or more devices in a few years' time. So the problem of security is going to multiply, and on a scale that we're probably not used to. And I think that is a challenge that vendors will have to start using, will have to start addressing. And I think companies also, I think we've seen this in slightly different contexts. I think we've always seen this security challenge in IT infrastructure, Sam, and I think for example, we see that as companies are deploying moving from in-house IT infrastructure to using cloud infrastructures, whether using infrastructure or platform or software as a service. I think cloud vendors are now obviously providing very scalable security solutions. And my take with a lot of companies when it comes to Internet of Things is that given the volume of data, my hunch is that a lot of the data is going to be stored on some cloud or multiple cloud vendors, systems all over the planet. And I think it's a nice story that some cloud vendors are becoming are paying a lot more attention to security. So which means as they do that, I think the IoT data is also, I think, going to have that level of safeguarding. I think that's part of the due diligence that, again, if I'm in a company and I'm deploying IoT and I have these tens of millions of devices that I'm getting data from, I have to make sure that the latest security sorts of standards are being deployed. One nice thing here is these are devices. I think the biggest weakness in a lot of security in companies, as you know, Sam, has been employees.
Right.
In this case, these are all machines. So at least one aspect of a security weakness isn't there. So
yeah. So social engineering will disappear. Is that
social engineering, but maybe something else.
There'll be something to replace it, of course. I don't want to get too focused on security because I think it's too fascinating. Someone else has asked a question here about like using this data in HR, for example. The point is that lots of people organizationally are not really ready to handle and manage that data and don't have necessarily that skills. So what are organizations going to do to get on top of the skills necessary for doing that? Lynn mentioned leveraging some of the existing skills that have come from other things, but I think there's a lot of people who are still lagging in those dimensions. What can people do?
Maybe Lynn wants to take a crack at it, and then I'll add my
sure. I'm thinking training is a big component of this. I mean, both to school to university like Boston College, Georgia Tech, to acquire this talent, and especially Vera's University and the ECMI department really has emphasized a lot on developing data analytics skills for our students, and we have really just a fast really a growth in this type of classes offered to our students, and also, I mean, there are also lots of really amazing resources out there on the web in MOOCs, in Coursera or in EDX or in NovoEd, and they offer lots of really just a few weeks courses to teach students teach people how to analyze skill in a very basic level. And a lot of time, as data analytics become more, the applications or software become more powerful, perhaps a lot of these analytics will be, will be built-in modules that can help people making decisions. Like, social media wasn't built like that, but now there are a lot of social media analytics software an application that can be directly feed into the managers or into individual employees, and then they can read this data and make it and understand the data, understand what they're saying, and make decision from it. So, there's really a lot of things people could do, but I agree that it is still a big challenge, and acquiring this data through hiring, acquisition is very important. We've seen that firms, when they hire data skills from a diversity of firms, like basically when they not the traditional firm that they generally hire from, but from a wide variety of firms, they acquire different type of data skill that can be very helpful. So that directly speaks to the hiring strategy. That can be really important for HR personnel to see what kind of talent's out there and capture it through hiring or training.
Good. So Sam, if I can just add on to what Lynn said, I think she has some good points. I think one is hiring talent, kids, let's say out of our in Georgia Tech example, MBA program, MS analytics programs, who are interested in HR and so on. We see those kinds of the opportunities. But I think more interesting is with the existing talent in companies, how you can make them more analytics aware, as Lynn was talking about. So one is to work with companies or with consulting firms, and they can provide some help. The other is to work with universities like Georgia Tech, like our center, Business Analytics Center, and so on, to sort of upgrade skills of employees. That's what we do with our executive council partners. And I think that probably is occurring all over the country, or should be occurring all over the country. And then I think Lynn hit upon a great point. I think there are some, at least in terms of certain tools and so on, there are these MOOCs, massive open online courses available from different universities via different vendors. And that's a possibility also. And I think it's an evolving area, and I think as new students from universities like the three of us keep graduating, I think what we see at Georgia Tech is everybody from the business school, whatever the area of expertise, whether it's marketing or HR or IT or operations, they're interested in getting to know more about analytics and so on. That's what we hear from all our recruiters and our MBA students, our undergraduate business students, and so on. And I think that's going to be the trend across various schools.
Yeah, actually, so our recent report at MIT Sloan Management Review in analytics was around this exact talent problem. The talent dividend is the name of that report. I think we are pretty close to being on time here, and I'm getting the hook. So I want to express my appreciation to everyone and thank everyone. The participants, there are a ton of great questions here, and I apologize that I lack the skill to be able to both follow the conversation and go through all the questions quickly. So I went ahead and apologize there. There's some great questions that we just haven't had time to get to, or I haven't been able to navigate quickly enough to get to. But I want to thank everybody for coming and participating. I think Annette may have a couple of reminders about follow-up emails, but let me thank everybody. Let me thank the participants, the panel, MIT Sloan Management Review, and Teradata. It's been a fun session. I hope it sparked some of your thinking about the challenges and opportunities in the coming age of the Internet of Things.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. That concludes our program. A reminder that a recording of this program and the presentation slides will be available within 2 business days. Thank you for attending our program today.